Hey everybody, welcome back to the High Performance Zone. Today I have Matt Knife Cooper, who is a cardiac surgeon, aerobatic pilot, 32-page bio. I don't think I've interviewed someone with a 32-page bio before, but here's what we really dive into, and it's very powerful. Matt gets it. Knife gets it from an aerobatic standpoint, not just a pilot, but an incredibly aerobatic pilot, not just a cardiac surgeon, but a chief medical officer, understands how what we're talking about in this operational excellence, this high reliability, most importantly, the glad to be here, how that's so needed in not only healthcare, but other aspects of our lives. He likes to describe a cardiac surgeon as a plumber with the engine still running. And we really dive into a lot of key points here. So Matt and I talking about Knife and Gucci, taking it to the next level. Ready? Hit it. Hello, everybody. Hey, welcome back to the Zone. I am super excited today because I have Matt Knife Cooper with me, and Matt's got a resume that's only 32 pages long. In fact, I will tell you, Knife, you've got the longest resume of anybody we've ever had on the show, and they'll find out really quickly why. But I just want to go with call signs. It's an honor to be with you. How'd you get the call sign Knife, and what are you up to these days?
So I'm an adult and pediatric cardiac surgeon by training and experience. And after I went through my basic flying ratings, I had the opportunity to fly with a bunch of Air Force folks who were out of Nellis at the time. And so we did
Nice.
a lot of formation flying. We did a lot of aerobatic formation flying and some BFM and
Nice.
combat and aerobatic airplanes. And so along the way, they gave me the call sign Knife. We even had the Jeremiah Weed naming ceremony, the
Nice.
whole thing.
All right. So for everybody who's listening, there's a couple of acronyms in there that are pretty critical. So I can tell Knife by just those acronyms, you know what you're doing, right? So BFM, what does that stand for? You remember?
Basic fighter maneuvering.
Yeah, and it's kind of like dogfighting. Most people think about dogfighting, right? And that's awesome because not everybody gets to do that. So you did formation flying with Nellis guys. Now, for everybody, Nellis is where the Air Force Top Gun school is. They call it their fighter weapons school. It's where the best of the best go. Chuck Yeager did a lot of work out of there. So, what's your relationship with Nellis? How did that get established?
Well, it was interesting because I wasn't flying back in 97, and my wife and I went to the 50th anniversary of the Air Force. And I said to my wife, I
Ah,
need to go learn to fly or enlist. And she said, okay, you can
nice.
learn to fly. And I went pretty quickly through my ratings and figured I'd never been upside down. So I went and
Ooh,
did some upset training in T-34s with Texas Air Aces down
beautiful.
in Houston, and got into the aerobatics and somehow got engaged with the community because a lot of military guys, as you know, have either general aviation aircraft or they're interested in
Sure.
the community, and hooked up with a bunch of folks who are just a great group who are willing to teach and just good to be with.
Wow. Okay. So in 97, the reason I know this is you were at the Kennedy School, right? And yeah, and I know that because I glanced through your resume and there's so many stuff, but I went, Kennedy School. And you got all kinds of degrees and stuff like that. But we almost were classmates because in 96, I was at the Naval War College and I was deciding where to go next. And I had gotten selected for this thing called the AEP Advanced Education Program. And just like you, I believe in growing and learning and continually. And one of them was I was going to go to the Kennedy School. Had my application in, and I was headed there. But under the it would have been what's it called? You got public policy, you got healthcare policy. What was your master's in?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a master's, it was a shorter course than that, but it was in health policy. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it was
health policy.
and it was through the thoracic surgical societies that we're working with the Kennedy School to try to develop leadership in medical entities. So
Nice. Well, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to dive into the leadership, the use of debriefs and briefs, and all these things that from both an aviator standpoint and most importantly, from a surgeon healthcare standpoint. But just to wrap up the aviation piece, because you got me so excited on that. So formation flying, what were you guys flying, and what kind of formation work did you do?
so It was a mixed formation. Some of the
Oh,
folks were flying RVs, RV6s, and RV8s. I was flying an extra 300,
oh,
and
nice.
so I had lots of extra power to maneuver and things. And we were doing loops, rolls, and things like
Yeah.
that. At that time, I was living in Las Vegas, so we were flying out of Boulder City. So we had great
Okay.
terrain. Every now and then we'd get a call on the radio that we should be heads up because the Thunderbirds were out practicing, and we'd just park ourselves and watch. So
Yeah, that's beautiful. Indian Springs is that close to Boulder City? The Indian Springs? Yeah,
not too far. And Creech,
yeah,
obviously up north. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's all insider information for those listening. It's just airfields around the Nellis. That's called. Remember the restricted area? It's Area 51 is what most people know it as. But yeah, there's a beautiful restricted area. It's there for a reason, and the Air Force has some great trainings, and I remember flying in that area many times. But it's super cool. Okay, so let's like dive in. So for those who are listening, you have an incredible background in medicine and aviation. Uh, let's dive into some of that background. And most importantly, what are you seeing today in the healthcare field? And how can aviation and the concepts that we talk about in the Fearless Success book apply or don't apply?
Right. Well, I think you start with the concept of high reliability,
Yeah.
and healthcare would probably surprise a lot of your viewers, is not a high reliable organization. And as human beings, we're flawed. Flawed. We have biases, we have fatigue, medical issues, colds, issues at home, all the things that we bring that impact our ability to observe, perceive what's going on around us. I'm a big believer in situational awareness. That
Yeah.
is certainly critical in healthcare as well. And that's not an individual sport only, it's a team sport as well. And it's certainly been shown over and over again that, for example, an average operation has multiple things that go wrong. And the ability of the surgeon and the team to pick those up is what brings it to a successful conclusion. It's even true about learning new operations for a surgeon. It's
Mhm.
not necessarily the experience of the surgeon himself or herself, but it's the team that makes that work. And I think that's a concept that's critical. It's also a concept that's being challenged nowadays. I mean, we've had so much instability in staff and the predictability of who you're going to work with. So you get to learn each other's nuances, if you will, and back each other up. That's
Yeah.
where I think we learn from aviation, but it's certainly challenged.
Well, put me in your shoes, any surgeon. Tell me when you said, multiple things go in a operation could go wrong. Fill me in. And how is the whole surgery done from pre, during, and post? I would call it the brief, you execute, you debrief. Do you do that? And if so, how? And where are some of the challenges?
So I do that,
Okay.
and that part's usually easy in terms of
Okay.
making sure that everything's prepared, everything's open, equipment that you're going to use and depend on has been tested to be functional.
Okay.
That part's usually pretty easy. The course of the operation where it takes a bit of work, because to have people and expect them reliably to speak up against hierarchy is a
Mhm.
real challenge. The old story of a junior nurse in Denton Cooley's operating room, is that if that nurse sees something that's of concern, will she or he speak up? And it takes a long time to develop the maturity of the culture so people know that we want them to speak up
Yeah.
and such, and then they're not going to be banished for doing that.
Well,
And
wait a minute. You said the old story, Denton Cooley. That's an inside story. What do you?
yeah, so I wasn't there, but and it may be more legend than actual story, but that's the concept. Cooley is hailed as one of the great pioneers, and with somebody new, fresh eyes, inexperienced, who sees something amiss, would they speak up? And
Got it.
certainly that's the case. But certainly during the course of the operation, it works two ways. One, you want a team that knows your routine, that's predictable, so you can focus on what you're doing. because
Yeah.
every time you're interrupted, that's a little bit of a red flag. It's a loss of concentration that you have to work extra to get back to. On the other hand, if you're deeply concentrating and everybody's concentrating, if somebody sees something or hears something, or it's
Yeah.
just they might not know the specific, but their gut tells them it's not right, they need to speak up. And that
Man.
part, and that part, you can teach. That part's not too
Okay.
big. But the hardest part is the debrief,
Yeah.
because the debrief, as you know, requires a maturity of the culture. That and we usually start in the old standard way of the least or the most least experienced or the most junior people in the room to speak first, so that they're not going to be impacted by what
Yes.
the team leader says. But to get people to speak up is a challenge. And then to be able to give constructive criticism and
Mm.
have it received in the spirit that's intended, which is process and performance improvement, and not go crying out of the room, takes time to build that.
Wow. We're going to dive deep into the debrief, but I want to go back to because I'm really interested in an operation. Can you give me an example of you said it so well where you have to trust your gut. You may not know something's what the answer is, but you got to trust your gut. I got a story where I almost took off with my canopy cracked, and I almost started flying a convertible. I didn't because of my checklist. But give me a story of trusting your instincts in the OR.
Well, it's in the OR, but also in the critical
Anywhere.
period afterwards. I mean, if a patient's, for example, we're in the operating room, you go very often with heart operations. We use a heart lung machine to support the circulation,
Okay.
allows us to isolate and stop the heart to work on it. And the pressure is just not right on bypass. We can't keep the pressure up to keep minimum blood flow to the brain. And so there's something wrong. You don't know what it is, but you got to look for a leak. You got to look for an aortic dissection that could occur, things like that. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
feeling that there's something not right. It's not obvious, but you have to keep looking until you,
Mm.
because if you don't fix it now, patient's not going to do well. It's a little
Yeah.
like on the aviation side, foreign debris in the cockpit, right? You know
Yeah.
it's there, and if you don't find it, it's going to show up when you least want.
Yeah, what that is FOD, right? Foreign object damage or foreign debris, little pieces. It could be, a washer to a bolt came loose, or it could be you brought something in there, or your pen falls out of your pocket, right? And boom, it can get into the controls, and all of a sudden you don't have full control, right? There's lots of
I've got
different
a
things.
got a story on that for you at some
Please,
point.
no,
Well,
go
so
for it now.
but no,
Go for it
okay.
now.
So I was scheduled to do an air show in Jean, which is not far from Boulder City, and I had a cousin who came into town, and in an extra, it's a two-seat airplane, and the pilot flies from the back seat. In an extra, there are two red handles, and if somebody squeezes that inadvertently, it gets noisy and expensive at the same time because the canopy jettisons. So, so a friend of mine made these half circle pieces of
By
plastic.
the by the way, the first movie Top Gun, remember when they ejected and the canopy goes?
Yep.
And same kind of thing. Military jets are same. The Extra 300 is an awesome airplane, but yeah, you pull that red handle and you're gonna. It's meant to get rid of that thing. So keep going. I'm just telling
Yeah,
that
yeah.
for
So,
other people.
a friend of mine made these half circle pieces of plastic that we could put between those two handles,
Oh,
prevent the front seat passenger from inadvertently, when they get scared or nervous or something, from
yeah.
grabbing that handle. So I had a cousin came to town, wanted a ride, big fellow. So I took him for a ride, gets out of the plane, and I cannot find that piece of plastic. And I spent an hour and a half looking for it. And I had an air show to do the next day at Jean, which is
Oh,
half-hour flight, so you know what's coming. So on the way to Jean, I did some maneuvers and things, try to break this thing loose to find, couldn't find it. So here's the big mistake. So I flew the air show, and coming out of a tumble at about 500 feet, 45 degrees nose down,
duh,
couldn't get the stick back.
duh.
And but you talk about how things slow down,
Yeah.
right? I remember calling the air boss and saying, I've got a problem, and him saying, just do what you need to do, we'll clear the space. And remembering having hangar flown in surgery, same sort of thing, that you
Yeah.
can get the nose up with trim, power for altitude, and manage to
Nice.
land. and that little piece was sitting in my elevator hinge when I landed.
Really? And I love the idea of trim. That's how you did it. You just used the trim tab. Nice, nice, good way to react under pressure. Speaking of that, um, I think the skills of a surgeon. And by the way, I was always told the heart surgeons are the smart ones, right? The best go into cardiac. Is that true?
Well, I have to be a little modest here, but 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 I think certainly we focus on physiology. We focus on the scientific. I think it is personality self-select. And I think cardiac surgeons are where the buck stops by personality, by training, by experience in many cases. Because the cases we take on by their very nature control lives.
Yeah, so life and death. Wow, good, nice answer though, because there are a lot of healthcare people that watch this, and I was trying to poke you a little bit in a good way. But yeah, I know that the cardiac surgeon and plus the training that you all go through and the amount of training to make that happen. So you mentioned, or at least I think I mentioned, performance under pressure. Um, can you tell me in aviation and in surgery, where did you learn how to perform under pressure?
I think that's a little bit of the personality substrate you bring a little bit to start. So there's a foundation, but I think it can be taught. And I think what you learn is that you take your pulse first, your own pulse
Mm,
first, if you got a
mm,
problem. And I think you have some different terms for that, but I think you talk about the same sort of
yeah,
thing. You take a second and look around, and you have to be confident enough in your training that you need to be able to revert to what you know, what you've done, or what you can apply. And and if you're the only one there, it's got to be you. You don't have a choice. You can't hand it off. So you just have to forge ahead. But
yeah.
as you know, not everything works out perfectly, and most surgeons, all specialties, will tell you that despite our best efforts, we're human. We as surgeons make mistakes. Patients don't respond sometimes as
Yeah.
the last 99 patients did predictively, and so some things don't work out well. But you learn from that, obviously.
How do we get the concept of debrief? Because that's to me where the learnings occur, right? Usually. Uh, so how do we make it so that it is more reachable to everybody for that person who may not have the confidence? And you mentioned too is now with healthcare, a lot of the people in that operating room aren't your team. They don't know you before. They rotate in and out, right? So how do you do it? And then I'll give you some thoughts on how we did it on the Blues.
Yeah, as the leader, you have to be willing to, yeah, humility. Obviously, a lot of people write about humility being an important character of leadership these days, but you have to be open. You have to show your vulnerability, so that others will be open to the honesty of the information, because it goes back and forth, right? It goes,
Yeah.
we want to learn from our team, we want to share with our team, but I think you have to start with yourself, and you have to show them and lead with that vulnerability so that they know you're genuine, that they can impact you.
Yeah, when you mentioned earlier that you like to do it with the most junior person going first, so they're not unduly influenced by more senior people, and that's one thing that I've learned with the debrief process is it varies, right? In different situations, I want to do exactly that. I definitely don't want to influence the room or the people, so let's go with somebody else. On other times, it's I think the leader needs to set the tone, right? And maybe what you're talking about is that the other people have to realize that you are open, you are vulnerable. I think there's strength in vulnerability, right? Especially, and what I've noticed in people who have mastered their craft, whether it's cardiac surgery or flying, the people who really have mastered it are usually the most humble. It's the other way. It's ironic, right? It's not it it's not because I've mastered something that I get this ego. It's actually usually just the opposite, right? Have you noticed that in surgery?
Sure, I think it people who are not willing to do that belies an insecurity of some sort.
Yeah.
That is true that even surgeons, team leaders can have a feeling of being psychologically unsafe if you
Mm,
and I think the cultures we work in now, certainly in healthcare, there's lots of scrutiny, whether it's from
mhm.
malpractice, whether it's economic credentialing from the hospital, things like that. There are risks in being honest and open when mistakes are made.
Okay,
So it,
so let's,
yeah, so it's not the spirit. The aviation culture is
yeah.
big on learning from others and learning from near misses. Medicine's got a little bit of catching up to do in that regard.
Yeah, and I know the legal piece is such a hindrance to that, right? Because malpractice is real, right? As far as both issues, and you already mentioned that we are humans, we all make mistakes. It's that human factors is always a piece to something. In fact, it's rarely the process that's broken. Sometimes you can fix that, but I've noticed that in aviation, and I think one of the things that helped aviation was there you go, drinking the glad to be here mug. I like it. And we got the t-shirt and everything. Was that they took that out of the equation pretty much, right? That at least in the military, I know that you don't have to worry about the legal aspect. It's let's just find out what happened. Now you're still accountable. You may lose your wings. I mean that happens all the time. You may lose your doctor certificate, whatever. But at least the legal thing we don't have to worry about. So how do we make that better in the culture that's currently in healthcare right now with the constraints that you're dealing with every single day?
You have to start individual by individual,
Okay.
um, and you have to appeal to their altruistic sense that
Mm,
they don't do better with complacency, and the patients don't do better with complacency, and the patients certainly expect of us to keep reevaluating our own performance to get better. But that's not enough. You got to go to the leadership.
mm,
And as you know, leadership doesn't mean you know how to teach
yeah.
cultural evolution. And so you've got to work with the leadership of the organization so that the overall umbrella embraces that sort of spirit of self and team evaluation for
Mm.
continuous improvement.
Now you're in that process. Tell me a little bit about uh, who you're working with right now, and aren't you in the transformation of a culture there?
Sure, actually, a next phase of a culture. So I've been with 3M now for 8 years. I'm nominally the chief medical officer of our medical solutions and global director of safety. And that let me start
Mm,
with the safety part because when I first joined 3M, we were very much a manufacturing company that thought about patient safety as a parts per million Six Sigma quality sort of thing,
got
rather
it.
than the patient at the end of the product and things. We have been evolving that culture to one more medically oriented, like a medical device company, because in fact, there are patients there. So there are behavioral aspects in how our products are used. For example, we have something called IFUs, instructions for use, that the FDA and the regulatory bodies think is very important and is important that accompany our products. Well, it's my belief that when you open up a product like something you get in the mail, the first thing you throw away are the instructions.
Yeah.
And so, how do you build into your products a tolerance of variability of use so that they're still safe, that they're likely to perform consistently the way you've intended, knowing that people will not use them 100% as intended or as taught? And so
Wow.
we've evolved that culture, and it's never perfect, as you know. It's never the final form. It's something you work at, but we're a lot better than we were. We have safety boards now. We have CAPA boards, corrective and preventive action boards that have derived very much from a sense of aviation, which is
Hmm.
we learn from manufacturing trends that have the potential to injure people but haven't yet. We learn from near misses, and then obviously we learn when things do occur and try to figure out root causes. And then the next challenge we're in, it's public knowledge, 3M is spinning off its healthcare division. And that's about an almost $9 billion division. It means that we're going to have a brand new freestanding healthcare company. So it's an opportunity to evaluate our culture, evaluate our processes, and continue to evolve, to do even better, to perform even better in the new state.
So the Blue Angels have a unique culture, as you know, and you're in aviation, but you also have read the book and understand some stuff. Uh, First off, what's similar in the Blue Angel culture, this culture that you're aware of that you think will transfer, and then what's different though? Because I'm sure there's both, right? And let's unpack some of that, and then maybe I can help you out with some of that. But go for
So
it.
again, looking from the outside, not
Yeah.
having had the privilege of being an angel, but
Wait a minute. I think you're an angel, but maybe not a blue angel, right? But you're
okay,
definitely an angel,
well, thanks.
saving lots of lives.
Thank you.
That's for sure.
But certainly the Blue Angels are the best of the best, and they have a track record that gets them to be selected for the team, and that is one of proven performance. Now there's different levels of maturity. Certainly, in most enterprises, most big companies, uh, you have a team that is very variable experience, variable maturity. As a leader, you know you can do for them what they're trying to do, but that's not what the leadership requires. You've got to coach them to grow, allow them to make mistakes, and so that they develop. And so the performance is not necessarily consistently optimal because you have people in these different phases of growing, learning, and achieving. And so could you say that if I had the best of the best from day one and put them on a project, would they do better, faster, and cheaper? Perhaps, but that's not
Yeah.
how our enterprises work. So that's
Right.
one. Second of all, there's a real sense of different levels of information in big companies. And I think big companies are starting to learn that distributed decision making, like the military practices and things like that, and taking independent initiative is important to be agile in the usual sense. But in order to allow that distributed decision making, you've got to share information across
Mm,
hierarchies, across silos. I think the Blues probably, as I understand, does a much better job of keeping people on the same page of music,
mm,
of sharing situational awareness. And within the commander's intent, if you will, your
mm.
mission plan, you have the ability to modify as necessary, consistent with that. I think the
Yeah.
other, there are some other differences. You have a finite term on the Blue Angels.
Mm,
In most other, certainly healthcare enterprise, as a practicing physician or in medical device, in the modern world, it's much more uncertain. With changes in the economy, changes and challenges to companies, dynamics like spinoffs, things like that, people are worried about their future, whether they're going to have a job or not. And despite best predictions about personnel needs and things like that, that impacts their ability to come to work, to show up,
mm.
to perform. And as you know, the process and the enterprise has to continue to perform, or you don't keep the lights on.
Right. Wow. So you brought up some huge points here. Let's see if we can come up with some together, some
Sure.
solutions to the challenges that you're facing. So the first one that you mentioned is the variability of growth, really, of people, right? Of skills levels. Um, so I think that on the blues, and then you tell me with healthcare, uh, the selection process is one of the keys, right? You said everybody, has a certain level of mastery or performance that's out there, and you're absolutely right. I mean, at least from a pilot standpoint, before you can even put your letter in, you'll have to have had a successful cruise, been deployed, learned a lot. Usually, we take people from the instructor ranks because one of the things that we learned to overcome this challenge you're mentioning is that it's not enough just to be good at what you do. You have to be able to teach someone else, And I love old Bill Belichick's threes. Do you know what Belichick has as three things? It's kind of famous.
No, do your job is one of them.
Yeah, it's the first one. So you're exactly right, Belichick. I like you smiling because yeah, do your job. That I think is most of what he focuses on. But second is become world class, right? And that's that mastery piece. But the third one is the most important one, and that is if you've able to achieve those first two, then you want to teach someone else, and that's that ability. And you just mentioned it. In healthcare, I think you're in that constant process of learning, growing, and giving back and teaching, right? At least I hope so. You'll have to tell me. And here's what's unique, though. That's actually what happens on the Blues. So people think that, oh, everybody who gets there is already at their top of their game. And if I could just surround, because I was just lecturing at Stanford Business School, go back there all the time. It's one of my old alumni, and that's the question I got from somebody. They said, "Oh, wait a minute, it's not a great comparison because you've got all these highly skilled people. They're motivated. They want to be there. Blah 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 blah. Right? And I don't. So I could see why you can perform at that level every day. And what I said, and then I want to hand it back to you and see what you're thinking on this. Is I said, well, that's not exactly true because I'll give you the analogy of the aircraft carrier. We got 17, 18, 19-year-old kids out there. I'll call them kids. They're young adults on the flight deck. Let me tell you, a lot of them don't want to be there. Okay. It's a very challenging job. I mean, you're out there, the jet blast deflectors, the heat, you're singeing. And it takes leadership to get that all to work the way it does. And on the Blues, it's actually at the same time because we are taking people in. It's just we accelerate that growth process really quickly. So selection matters, but I think training and leadership matter. That's what I get down to those three things. So how can we do that in healthcare? Because I know you're challenged with so many things. What do you think? Let me pass it over to you. What do you think?
Well, so I'm a big believer, and I'll give somebody a plug that I don't get any royalties from, but Liz Weissman has written a very good book called Multipliers, and
Okay.
and and I think that's something we all see, and that is we attract talent, and we're on a continuum of what we do with that talent. Do we micromanage it and so-called diminish it, or do we
Mm,
actually enable the growth, development, even if they outgrow us? And
yeah.
and and I think that's part of it. I think we have to treat the talent that we're able to recruit from a multiplier standpoint. That how do we make them better? How do we help them grow? And that's something that they can then perceive because what they can do in response is they can manage up, down, horizontally to make the whole thing go. Because one of the things we face is how do we retain talent?
Yeah.
Because you read in the Wall Street Journal, people can go uh, across the street for a better title or a better pay. So once you've invested in talent, how do you make them know that they're valued, so that ultimately that you retain them and you don't have to start again? I think that's part of it.
Okay. That you're diving into why we're both wearing these shirts. Glad to be here, right? Because I think one of the keys is to me, glad to be here means more than operational excellence, more than process. Absolutely, all of that. High reliability, but it's adding in that piece of caring, that piece of training, that piece of appreciation and gratitude. Um, Tell me about that. How do you see glad to be here benefiting the healthcare space?
I'm not sure. I think glad to be here right now is aspirational for us. That's the final level. I think that we get people to start to work together because they're motivated by their basic human nature to do
Yep.
well. And
Yep.
certainly in healthcare, we've got patients at the end. We want to do well um,
Mm-hmm.
for patients. And the issue then is, okay, we want to do well. This is uniting us in something more important than self, something bigger than self. But now the realities of the world come in. Okay, I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about my competitive pay. I'm worried about whether I'm overtasked because of staffing issues. The glad to be here part, That's where that jump to the glad to be here is really challenging. And you just have to
Yeah,
work at it because we have constraints sometimes that we can't overcome.
yeah,
There are limits because of business reasons, because of other reasons. And so you just have to actively, day by day, as you know,
yeah.
work on the interactions one by one, interaction by interaction, to open communications with people, to make sure they know you're invested with them, and to encourage them to grow, to think beyond what their roles are, what their tasks are. It's not perfect. It's not a magic one, but I'm open to
Oh.
suggestions, certainly.
Well, yeah, I'm with you 100%. And that's why I'm enjoying this conversation because, I am trying to learn and figure out how do we connect those dots, right? How do we build the bridge that I know I experienced every day in the Blue Angels? And it wasn't perfect. I mean, believe me, we had many challenges, right? And but how do we connect the dots? So one of them that made me just hit your thought here is um, I think creating that environment, psychological safety and physical safety, of course, which I know healthcare works tremendously on. Which I find ironic that what are the stats that one of the most dangerous places to be is in the hospital. Actually, when it comes to that, is I don't know if that's the right words. What do we say?
Well,
What do you
sure. I
say?
mean, there are lots of hospital-acquired complications, hospital-acquired infections,
Yeah,
a lot of which are preventable. I mean, as a surgeon, for example, we use electric cauteries in the operating room to stop bleeding. Well, that's
yeah.
burning. There's smoke. For all these years, none of us worried about our own smoke inhalation.
Wow, I
Now,
never knew that.
and now there are scavengers to take away that smoke. So,
Yeah, there you go. See, little that's it. That's amazing stuff like that. But I think one thing, and let's unpack this in healthcare, right? In the Blue Angels, I thought about it, and it wasn't just the Blues, it's aviation. I came up with what I call the five dynamics that allow a debrief to actually become successful, right? And most of them are psychological, emotional behaviors that we're trying to get established, right? So the first is that safe environment. But I think the key is it's not the physical safe environment, it's the psychological safe environment that you mentioned before, right? Does someone feel they can even speak up, right? Or are they going to get hammered? And then I'm going to ask you to comment on each of these and see if I'm on or if we got to modify them. The second one is this ability to have humility, right? And you mentioned that earlier too. This ability to check your ego at the door. That especially I've been told that the surgeons are the most challenged with this. Sometimes it sounds like you're not. That's for sure, right? And but in healthcare, a doctor's trained to be a certain way, right? And now I think that training is you'll have to tell me if we're training more on the team aspect side as compared to the one who's got their hand on the stick like a single seat fighter pilot, right? Um, Third one I found is that open and honest communication. I like to call it lay it on the table. So this ability to, hey, let's lay it on the table. We might not know the answer. But it needs to be at least put on the table here, right? The fourth one is that the most challenging usually is that accountability piece. But I realize that word accountability scares a lot of people. At least it scares me because it typically meant, okay, you did something wrong and you're going to be held accountable. And I found it's just the opposite. What it really is allows personal responsibility that drives an ownership mentality. And to me, it becomes fun when everybody wants to own the outcome and not just own their little role. And to me, in a surgery, that's what it's all about, right? But the last one is that glad to be here, the gratitude, right? That's the magic sauce because the first four are more operational excellence kind of ideas, but they do have some deep behavior in there. So my first question to you is: Are those spot on? And how would you assess? How do we get those into healthcare, or are there some things that we need to tweak?
well, there's a lot there, obviously.
Yeah.
And I would say the other component I think that probably the Blue Angels do and feel is something that the leader needs to instill in the team, whether it's in medical device in the operating room, is that you have your team's back.
Okay.
And so you help create that cocoon that allows them to open up and to speak.
Mm,
So I think yes, there has to be that honesty. I think people are legitimately afraid to be accountable. I think when you point them out, it's easy, and the healthcare system has unfortunately always tried to blame individuals rather than looking at processes.
Right.
Um, it's the James Reason Swiss cheese slices issue. It's the latent potential. It's the system that allows events and human interaction to things that are preventable. But that's not how healthcare has dealt with things. And I think
Interesting.
largely still today, healthcare tries to blame individuals for things that go awry. And
Okay.
so that's part of what you're fighting upstream. And so I think you have to enable the honesty and the communication and the accountability. Because even if people then say, okay, I'm accountable and I'm going to fix it.
Yeah.
And if I need your help fixing it, help me. Teach me what I need to know so I do it better next time. Then we've got to insulate them in healthcare better so that they're not pointed out as the individuals put for blame. We've still got to shift that sense of it's the process, it's the system interaction. It's not just the human being. Now, it is
Mm,
true that you can work with people, and some people need remedial help, and some people may not be in the right situation or the right position after all that if they can perform to some level. So there has to be honesty on that end too. And
mhm.
so, as you know, if somebody doesn't cut it, even after everything you've done, and they either bring down the team or they increase the hazard for the team, then you help them somewhere else. I think
Yeah.
that's part of it too. The glad to be here. I think in healthcare, one of the ways we get to that level is to show the end result of what we do. And
Mm,
if it's OR staff or critical care nurses bringing patients back who were life and death, who were tenuous, that those nurses or doctors busted their tails to survive, and those patients come back. And in healthcare, certainly. For example, we're a huge purveyor of negative pressure wound therapy, these big, chronic, nasty wounds. When we're able to show people that survive these terrible traumas with terrible wounds that are healed and bring that back to show our teams what they're doing, that helps to inch them to that glad to be here. Because again,
wow.
it's the bigger than self, but it's that next level of, okay, now I'm glad to be here because this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm contributing to.
Wow. You just nailed something that I find is so beautiful. We're writing a new book right now. And I was having a discussion this morning with one of my writers, and we were talking about one of the joys is where's your energy come from? The energy to do the jobs we do. And one of them on on me for flying was going to the crowd line and seeing the look in the little kids' eyes, right? And I could bust my butt for however many weeks. It only takes that one smile, that one little kid, and you've got some energy for a long time, right? And so I was just thinking about that probably doesn't help happen that much in healthcare, right? Because maybe the doctor gets to see the follow up, but so how can we do that? Because I think how powerful would that be to see someone back in and they're like, thank you. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. I mean, that's huge.
Well,
How,
I think it's something we don't think about, and probably I haven't done enough, is to consciously try to schedule opportunities,
yeah.
the teams that work on things to see that their end result and their end impact.
That's
Yeah.
so beautiful. I'm glad we discussed that because now it comes, now you got to put it in the system, right? Because and it's not like we got extra time. I mean, all of us are going but it's so critical for that piece to actually happen. It's funny as a patient, when I go to healthcare organizations, I get to work with a lot, but to actually be a patient, I've actually now that you mentioned it, I've consciously been taking time to not just tell people thank you, but to show them that this really matters and what you all are doing to help me. I got some stem cells in my knee, and it was a process, and I'm like, wow, look at this. Hopefully this will help others. And I just saw their face when someone really does care. You can see it in their face. They're like, thank you. They're like, wow, look at this. Hopefully this will help others. And I just saw their face when someone really does care. You can see it in their face. They're like, they're like, they want to hear that. They want to hear the stories. So maybe all of us, one step we could do is just be present enough, be aware enough to know that taking a moment and telling somebody why you're grateful is really important. What do you think?
It is important. Surgeons are very often, nobody remembers your last great triumph as a surgeon. It's your last disaster by which you,
Yeah.
and but there are still cases I can remember over the years, and I've been doing this a while, but I remember, for example, there's an entity where postpartum after birth, there might be a spontaneous dissection, separation of the wall of the aorta or the coronary arteries, and that's
Mm.
an emergency. And I remember now 25, almost 30 years ago, operating on a gal who had left main coronary spontaneous dissection immediately after giving birth, and
Whoa.
took her to the operating room, bypassed it, and I got Christmas cards annually for years and years, and it among the thousands of operations, but that little thing was just the was emblematic of how you can impact somebody. Or certainly I've
Uh,
done heart transplants and things, and when you do a heart transplant, you give somebody a new lease on life. Not perfect, but it's but you give somebody the opportunity to be with their families, to fulfill dreams and things. So it's an opportunity.
yeah, I think back to flying again. You know, as a pilot, you get to do some cool things like you do as a surgeon. But it was my troops, it was the maintenance crew that really had the most interaction with the customer, the patient. I mean, I had a little bit of interaction on the crowd line, but they were there hours before me. They were there interacting with the kids. They were there really being that ambassador of goodwill. And I think that's true in healthcare too, right? I mean, I'm thinking about how we can really get this joyful effort throughout the whole process, the whole system.
Again, I think it's got to be programmed. For example,
Okay.
now on the medical device side, we have a couple of opportunities with our teams where we bring, obviously with their permission, patients back and their families
Hmm.
back to tell their story, to tell where we've impacted them, usually positively, and the lives we've been able to put back together. And it always has a profound rejuvenation of the team. But
Wow.
again, as you know, human factors, that doesn't last. You got to keep
Yeah.
reinforcing that periodically.
Have you found in your own personal life, not with the system yet, let's just go to personal life for a second. How do you keep your energy up? How do you keep your passion for doing this? Because it's amazing what you're accomplishing. How do you do that?
Well, it's hard sometimes. And when my wife would tell you that sometimes she tells me to just go play racquetball and hit something, or go to the gym and do some Krav Maga and hit somebody, because we're human too, and sometimes you get
Oh,
frustrated. So, and burnout's a real issue
yeah.
for healthcare these days, as it is for business and such. And so you got to come up with something that works for you, that allows you to refresh and then show up again and do what you need to do.
Yeah. I like your helmet in the background. Let's show me that. Can you? Is it
Sure.
too far away? Can you grab it? And I'll grab my helmet because what I want to look at this. Okay, so look at that gold. Not many people have gold helmets. Also, what do you
Yeah.
got on the side there? Explain it to me. What do you
So,
got?
so I'm a little bit of a retro rocket fanatic. So I've got rockets and stars on the back.
Ha
And maybe
ha!
that's the old Buck Rogers in me a little bit.
Oh, I love that. We're now, yeah, very similar. You got your name on there. We're gonna have to put knife on there pretty soon. Not not just the name. Okay. Is that a Flight Suits Unlimited helmet? Where'd you get that made?
Yep, Flight Suits Unlimited. In fact, I sent it back recently. It's
Oh, you
got
did?
it's got active noise reduction in it, but in the aerobatic planes, you still get a fair amount of noise. So they put that CEP connection in for that low frequency.
Oh, I
Uh,
don't know. I don't know about that. What is CEP?
CEP, I think most of the military now uses
They
that.
might.
It's an extra set of earplugs that takes care of that low frequency noise that's in the fuselage and the structure. So it's
Oh,
not the
really?
same frequency for most active noise reduction. So.
Interesting. I don't even think we had noise reduction when I was there. I have no idea, right? Whatever the helmet was, I just put it on and that was it. But that's so cool that you have one of those. So is what's flying mean to you? Why did you get so passionate? And you know, a lot of people fly, but rarely do they go to the level that you're talking about. What was it for you?
Well, for me, it was a little bit something I always wanted to do. Grew up wanting to be an astronaut, and then
Yeah.
things got distracted
Hey, we're
a
going back
little
to
bit.
the moon. You want to go to Mars? Maybe they'll hire you or I. Huh?
Well, I'm a little old for that. They just selected a crew, but one I'd like to be for the return trip first. But that's because Elon Musk has said that it wouldn't be bad to die on Mars, so that has raised some questions. But for me, flying, particularly the aerobatics, as you know, it's just unlimited. And if you're not paying attention, I think you've used the same words. It's a bit unforgiving. Um, and so, and that's exactly what I need. For a cardiac surgeon whose life and death, you need to be refreshed. And for me, that was a way of doing that. It's the concentration, it's the scientific stuff, the physics stuff, but just the concentration to take you away from everything else.
Isn't that amazing that a few people I know who are at your level, it is interesting how flying lets you get back into that concentration space, but at the same time, it's freeing because it's a different kind of concentration, right? I mean, when different, what I mean is you're not worried about what's the next problem I got to solve in the healthcare system. You're just focused on something that's fun. You tell me though, what do you mean when you say it's the concentration? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's interesting because years ago, when I was first working with a group that you probably know a lot of the principals, Life Wings, and we
Yeah.
can talk about probably some mutual friends, but and we try to teach healthcare workers to invest in safety, analogous to the pilots. Well, the difference is that when a pilot is at risk, he or she
Oh
himself,
yeah.
their own life is at risk. In healthcare, it's not, it's the patient. And so,
Yeah.
how do you make that same commitment? And I think that's part of it. I think when you're doing things like aerobatics, flying to some degree, but aerobatics certainly and such, your own life is on the line. So you've got to be there, you've got to be focused, you've got to be present. And it's you just jazzed, you're live. And
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that true? There's a feeling of freedom and life that comes when you're pushing the limits, no matter what, right? So you hit a really key point. How do we get that feeling when life and death is on the line? Great, I get it, right? There's a lot of things that become a little bit more important in the moment, right? So that awareness and the focus. But I've noticed the fundamentals are the same. It doesn't have to be life or death. We can still do it in other ways. How do we motivate people to do it when it's not life and death?
well, it's tough because I think as a culture, we've lost altruism. People are much
Mm,
more focused, and you hate to sound generational, whether this is the Me Too generation, things like that. I think we have a lot to learn from the younger generations in terms of balance, but I think sometimes their own focus is internal and it's not on others and
mm,
sharing and the potential to help others. So I think that the stories of impact, of positive impact that we can make on others' lives, and it doesn't have to be, as you know, it doesn't have to be in healthcare. It can be little
right.
things. But we've got to work actively to share those stories back to close the loop, because I think if we continue to do that, that does become enriching to one's life. It's that
Mm,
extra that makes them get up, but it's that extra for which they push a little bit more because of what they're getting back. And it's not monetary or a patch or something like that. It,
mm.
it's that bonus of being a human being that they can do for others. But we don't do that in a programmatic way. We don't do that usually in a consistent way.
Yeah, interesting you bring that up. I was just speaking to Pratt and Whitney 2 days ago, and Pratt. they do the engines for the F-35. It's the F-135 team. So, and they do civilian engines and all that kind of stuff. And after the talk, I was they were giving out leadership awards and stuff, and I was in the back by the AV crew, and one of the leaders came up. Then we started talking, and he was a C-130 pilot, Air Force C-130 pilot, and he kind of made the same reference that you just made. He said, "You know, we talk about people, we do the processes, we're doing all this, but people don't always get the experiences that you just had, right? And so to be able to share that in a way makes the difference." And then he told me this, and this is where I'm leaning up to, is he said his dad told him that your skills and your abilities are not for you. It's to serve somebody else. It's for someone else. And I went, that was, yeah, I like you're smiling, because I went, whoa, what a beautiful way. Did your dad, did your mom, where did you get that feeling? Because I already know you have it.
Well, so it's transformed for me also. So one of the reasons I went into medicine was my parents had three boys, and I lost a brother, a middle brother. He was 6 when I was 8, and he died of an acute leukemia, which is now curable.
Mm,
And one of the reasons I went into medicine was to help people, to cure people. It's interesting, though, that as you move away from the primary care types of things, the oncology,
mm,
which is tremendously challenging and difficult, and small gains mean so much that as a surgeon, you're very much removed from that fuller sense. You're very technically oriented. You know, cardiac surgeons are plumbers with the engine still running. Things like that. You probably heard that.
I like that. No, I haven't. I think that's
But
great.
you know, you're very technically oriented, and sometimes it's easy to lose the bigger picture. But certainly that's the motivation. But it's back to that fuller sense of being motivated to help people. And I think most people in medicine did not go into it for the money. They certainly didn't go into it for lifestyle
Mm,
balance.
wow. Wow. Hey, what lessons can you share from your personal upbringing or your life? I always like to dive into what drives you. Are there certain things? Are there certain experiences that you had that you want to share with others so they can grow?
I think still to this day, one of my biggest heroes, if not the biggest, was my father.
Yeah.
And he didn't finish college, but he was a smart man, smart about the world. Family came first. He'd do anything for family and for friends. He was the first
Mm,
one to take the shirt off his back, but he had a backbone. He didn't take any bull from anybody, and you know, not a fighter per se, but served in the army in World War II.
wow.
But you know, he had his priorities right. He had his head screwed on right. He treated people the way, literally, the way he wanted to be treated. He walked the walk. And so that's perhaps one of the first things. Now, there's a bit of inflexibility in there that
Yeah.
as a youth, maybe you over understand, and obviously you get matured in some respects so that you're much more balanced. But I think it started with that. And I think those sorts of foundations were the things I wanted to teach my daughter growing up.
Wow. Were there any quotes? I just came to mind my dad, who, by the way, military, same background that you're talking about, total respect. And whenever I was a little bit outside the parameters, he'd always say, "Get with the program." So when Dad said, "Get with the program," it was a nice prelude that you're outside of the parameters. It's time to get back in there. And I think that's so
Yeah.
it struck me and it served me in many things. You know, at the Naval Academy, it's a pretty tight program, and if you get outside, they're going to tell you. You know, and how have you any sayings your dad had that just really
No
stuck?
specific sayings, but both my folks, I think the message without specific words they gave to me and my brother was that we will support you whatever you want to do. We suggest you do something where you have some degree of self-determination.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and I became a doctor, and my brother's a lawyer, and both of us, our fields have lost some degree of self-determination. But I think that I think that was the message. But along with that was the unspoken expectation was that we'd keep our eyes on the goal. That you can have fun, you can explore, but there's a goal at the end and there's goal direction. And
Mm,
I've certainly seen that with my daughter. I think it's a little bit different nowadays, and I think she's right in wanting a little bit more experiencing the world before she focuses too soon.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? You got to do both. I think about when I was a junior in college at the academy, I had a month off and I went and did a Euro pass in Europe, and did that exploration. What a blast. If I think about what I remember that summer. I remember being on my own on a Euro pass, just exploring life. At the same time, that wasn't my goal. My goal was go fly jets. So can you do both? I guess is the question.
You can, you
Yeah.
can. And I know as an adult, I've gone back now to read the things I didn't read when I was younger,
Ah,
to try to become more of a Renaissance person, uh,
yeah,
and the blinders on with a goal in sight. And so, if I had to do it again, I'd probably encourage people to explore a little bit more earlier on, so
yeah.
that they have a richer sense of the world. But you can do it either way, obviously.
Got it. Hey, I'm reading some of your credentials again, and not just in healthcare, which are mind blowing, but you talk about transforming outcomes. You've written a lot about that. Anything you can share on that with this audience?
Well, I
Key
think it's back to
takeaways.
the same issue of never ever being complacent.
Okay.
It's not good enough. And particularly as we think about trying to perfect the present, we can't do that entirely at the expense of the future. We have to continue to substantively prepare for the future. And so none of us get complacent. Again, as I said earlier, as a physician, our patients don't expect us to settle. And what's good enough isn't really good enough. We've got to keep going. We can never just sit back and say,
Yeah.
we're there. And I think that's the message in healthcare. I think that's the message in life in some respects.
Yes.
We continue to work at relationships, and certainly, if you have partners, the relationship takes work to be
Yeah.
successful over time, right?
Yeah, I love what you just said about the. I think there's a thirst for continuous improvement. I don't know where I got that. I think it was my upbringing always, but I'm like you, constantly trying to get a little bit better, but in a way that's also meaningful, right? So better in relationships, better in enjoying my life, better in balance, better, all this, and even better is not the right word, but it's this thirst to grow, and I've tried to sum it up with a new mantra I have, which is called learn, grow, give. I want to learn every day. Learning's not enough. I love the data and all that kind of stuff, but I want to grow in some way, one shape for it to really truly understand. And then giving, right? Giving back is so critical as a leader. And your life just describes that learn, grow, give process. How do you share that with others? What have you learned from that process?
Well, and maybe that's a bit of the glad to be here, which is a great way of explaining. Sometimes you don't take the time to sit back and say how lucky you are. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm on the board of an organization that helps to provide education for Nigerian children. And,
Uh,
there's tremendous wealth in Nigeria from oil, but it doesn't get to the basics of educating their kids or facilities. And look at what, even in the worst situations in the United States, look at the educations that we provide and take for granted. So
yeah.
you don't have to go far to see the differences that exist and the opportunities that exist to help.
What's the name of that organization? In case
Oh,
anybody.
Biza, Bizaa, and
Nice.
it's an American based group led by a Nigerian, basically that looks at zonal Africa, and the intent is to give people an opportunity to get kids away from the sex trades, away from the financial motivations of families to allow their kids to participate, to give them schools so they can grow and learn and outgrow that culture.
Wow. Beautiful. Yeah. I hope people look up and maybe maybe can help donate to that. So, Knife, this has been an incredible time. I feel like you're actually a warrior that's out there in healthcare trying to make that difference, not only the safety aspect, but the cultural transformation that needs to occur. So I want to say, first off, thank you for that. I'll end on the glad to be here, and then I'll let you close us out on what glad to be here means to you. But for me, I'm just grateful to have had this time together. I'm grateful that I was able to talk with you, who has the insights both from an aviation and a healthcare standpoint, and to see where those come together. There's a lot more we can do, of course, but and most of all, it's just cool to talk pilot stuff with you, man. You got the acronyms down. You've got, not everybody's got a low altitude card and done aerobatics and has flown, and you've actually, downplayed a lot of what you do. It's incredible, right? And I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Glad to be here. Over to you.
Well, I have to start with where something we touched on already. I've got to start with my parents for bringing me up with hopefully my head screwed on right most of the time with the right priorities. I've got to thank my wife Nina, who's still with me and helped me through the slings and arrows, and obviously my daughter Neela, and and I'm grateful for opportunities like this, like meeting you, because obviously we're trying to make this a better world. It's not just for our own self-improvement, our own self-aggrandizement. We can make a difference. We've got to start thinking about that and our opportunities to do that. And I'm glad to be able to think about that. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Knife. Let's go flying sometime, or skiing at least, because I
Yes.
hear we can go to Sun Valley. Okay, buddy. Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Gucci.